guys, welcome to Laptop Jewel. I am Tiffany. Thank you so much to everyone that has been liking, sharing, subscribing, and joining the notification gang. Title of the message is Sit Through It, right? And actually, it was so weird because just before I got this message, I was listening to a podcast, and it wasn't even Christian like a Christian podcast, right? And one of the things that they mentioned is that because as humans we always want to just get over and get through whatever we're going through, but sometimes we need to kind of sit in it, stay within that journey or that difficulty or that storm, just to sit and stay in it. And actually what just came to mind right now is me thinking of, for example, if you are in a storm, like you're driving in a storm. Obviously, I think it's not advisable. I'm not sure. It's not advisable probably to stand, but it is actually, because now you're driving, anything could happen. But it is difficult to, I guess, sit in the storm because you don't know, right? What's gonna happen? What is the end goal? You don't know. But it's so important that you sit in there, because you might just sit and you might sit for like a few minutes and it might just be over, So that not knowing, there's sometimes a benefit and advantage of just sitting and staying within your storm. So I'm reading from Mark 8, verse 31 to 33, right? And it said, Jesus predicts his death, right? So this is verse 31. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. And when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. Get behind me, Satan, he said. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. The first thing is that Jesus knew the purpose and the will of God for his life. And sometimes, we go through certain storms, we go through certain situations, but when we are aware of the purpose and the calling that God has called us for, we will be able to just sit and push through that phase, that journey, that storm, because we know God's purpose, we know the end goal of whatever we are going through, right? And with Jesus, he knew exactly what God has called him for, why he needed to come here. And even though he knew that it was gonna hurt, it was gonna be painful, but he knew God's will and purpose for his life, right? And he said that he taught on what is going to be happening to him and how people will reject him and how he will go through rejection, how he will be hurt, but at the end of that, after 3 days, he will rise again. And I'm here to tell you, after that storm, you will rise again. After that painful journey, after that heartbreak, you will rise again. And it's so important because now this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. So Peter was like, how can you say all of these things? You can't be saying all of these things. And Peter began to rebuke him. And sometimes our flesh and the people around us will start to rebuke us and be like, no, but actually, like, you don't need to go to church. I mean, you're going through so much already, like, don't go to church. Or people are going to be like, but why are you still praying? Like, God is not even coming through for you, or your flesh is going to be like, but you know what, actually, like you're going through a rough time, just try that, just try this, just to escape what you are going through. People and your flesh is going to tell you against the will of God. That's very important. People and your flesh will tell you against the will of God, but you need to stand firm in what God has said, in what God will do, in his promises, no matter the storms. Like, I think one verse that I've also just been meditating for the past day or two, and it says in Psalms 34 verse 1, which I've really just been meditating to, and it says, I will bless the Lord at all times, his praise shall continually be in my mouth. So regardless of whatever you're going through, regardless of whatever storm, regardless of whatever problem, at the end of the day, his praise shall continually be in my mouth, regardless of whatever storm, whatever battle I need to face, knowing that God will fight for me, that God is walking beside me, because he said he'll never leave you nor forsake you. But you need to stand firm on what God has promised you, on what God has said. You need to stand firm on those promises, because God will never fail his word. God doesn't go against his word. It says in his word that my word will not turn void unto me, but it shall accomplish what I please it to. So what God has spoken, he will bring it into pass. But why will it? Because God is not a man that should lie, that he should make a promise and not fulfill it. So God is faithful. God is faithful. And you know what? Jesus stood his ground in that moment that, Peter was starting to rebuke him and saying, but how can you speak about all of these things? And then Jesus stood his ground and said, listen here. And he said, get behind me, Satan. So now you probably ask yourself, but why would Jesus say to Peter? But sometimes, because it says in God's word that our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, force of darkness, and wickedness in high places. So our fight is not against the person, but our fight is against the spirit behind the person, or the spirit in the person that is trying to derail us from our purpose or what God has called us for. And sometimes someone is going to say to you something that might not be according to the will of God, and you are going to have to rebuke whatever they have spoken. You might not need to rebuke the person, but rebuke what they have spoken, and rebuke the spirit in or around them. The thing is, he says, you do not have in mind the concerns of God. Sometimes the people around you will not have the concerns of God. They will not understand the will of God for your life. They will not understand why God has called you, what God has called you for. So sometimes you might be on a specific journey and people are going to derail you from the journey. They are going to discourage you. They are going to tempt you with the things of this world. But you need to stand firm, just like Jesus stood firm in that moment, in that time. He rebuked Peter, and you need to stand firm and be like, listen, this is what God has spoken, this is what God has said, this is my purpose, this is my calling, and I will walk in it regardless of whatever pain, whatever situation, whatever storm. I will walk in it because I'm walking beside God, and this is what God has called. And whatever God has called you for, he will sustain you. He will provide for you, and he will be with you until the end of age. And it says, but merely human concerns. And he told Peter that, listen, you do not have the concerns of God, but you have the concerns of human concerns. You must understand that when people are not walking in the spirit, they're walking in the flesh. So what they see and what they're controlled by is the flesh. They're controlled by sight. But it says that the just shall live by faith. So sometimes God has given us a calling. Sometimes God has spoken in our lives. God has given us a promise. And sometimes our reality seems different towards what God has called us for. But you need to look at, remember, see, because we live by faith and not by sight. You have to not be derailed or confused or moved by what you see, but you have to be moved by what God has spoken to you. You have to be moved by what God has spoken to you and not by what you see physically, because the minute you see and you are controlled by your flesh, that is the minute the enemy can take and have control over your life. But you need to be like, listen, God has said this, God will do it. It says that there is nothing that is too hard for God. He is the creator of the universe. There is nothing that is too hard for God. Sarah and Abraham was in their 90s. They were old, but God has promised them that they will bear children, or they will bear a child. And you know what? It might take long, but I need you to remember what God has promised, what God has spoken to you. God told Abram that you will be the father of nations, of many nations. But at that point in time, he said, how is it even possible? But you know what? And also, the flesh came, and he was like, and then Sarah persuaded him, listen, let us sleep with the handmaid, sleep with this woman. And sometimes let us not make decisions on what we see and the flesh, because then it delays what God has called us for even more when we listen and are led by the flesh and led by what we see. But we need to be led by what God has spoken. He said that we need to be led by the Spirit. We need to live in the Spirit. And we need to be led by the Spirit, because it says that where the Spirit is, there is freedom, there is liberty. Sometimes it seems like the flesh and what we see has freedom, but it doesn't. Everything that we see is temporary, but everything that we don't see is eternal, is everlasting. I pray somehow this message has encouraged, motivated someone out there that might be like, listen, I am going through the storm, but God has promised me something. How do I still stand firm in this journey? And listen, I'm speaking to myself right now, because I was at a time and a moment and a season in my life where I felt like, Lord, this is a bit too much to bear. And somehow I kind of just slightly, derailed a bit, and God was like, listen, I have called you for something greater than what you have experienced or what you are experiencing, but I need you to be faithful in what I've called you for. And God has given me a word in the beginning of the year, and I need to really hold on to that word, because things get so difficult that sometimes we want to let go of our faith. But I'm here to encourage you, do not let go of your faith. Do not forget what God has called you for. Don't forget your calling. Don't forget your purpose. It is greater than what you are seeing. It is greater than your challenge or your storm that you are facing. I'm Tiffany, and this is Laptop Jewel. I hope this has blessed you. To everyone that has watched, please make sure that you tell Rachadi, Rangwani, your uncle, your aunt, your Oma, listen, Laptop Jewel is always popping. Make sure that you join the notification gang by just pressing that notification bell, so that every time I upload, you will be notified immediately. I love you guys so much. Mwah.